The crisp autumn air of Des Moines, Iowa, on that fateful day in 1979 held a deceptive tranquility. It was a Tuesday, a day like any other, when the esteemed members of the local garden club gathered for their weekly meeting. Laughter mingled with the scent of late-blooming roses as they discussed chrysanthemums and garden pest woes. Among them was Margaret Collins, a beloved widow, her as much a fixture in the community as the grand oak trees lining the streets. But as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, an unsettling silence would descend upon the city. Margaret Collins never made it home that evening. She simply vanished, an elegant ghost dissolving into the twilight, leaving behind a bewildered community, and a chilling void that would echo for decades. Her sudden, inexplicable disappearance from such an ordinary setting, without a single witness or a shred of explanation, was not just a local tragedy, it was the birth of a mystery that would defy time. Margaret Collins was, in every sense of the word, a pillar of her community. A woman in her late 60s, recently widowed, she had channeled her grief into vibrant civic engagement, and most notably, her cherished garden. Her home, a charming two-story with a meticulously manicured lawn and a riot of colorful blooms, was a testament to her disciplined yet joyful spirit. She was known for her kindness, her sharp wit, and her unwavering dedication to her friends and family. Margaret had raised 2 successful children, both grown and living outside Des Moines, but she maintained close ties, speaking to them frequently. Her weekly bridge games, her volunteer work at the local library, and, of course, her treasured garden club meetings were the anchors of her routine. She was a creature of habit, punctual, reliable, and deeply rooted in the predictable rhythms of her life. The idea of Margaret impulsively running off, or having any hidden enemies, was utterly preposterous to anyone who knew her. She commanded respect not through wealth or power, but through her sheer decency and genuine warmth. Her disappearance wasn't just a loss, it was a violation of the very fabric of their quiet, ordered world, an impossibility made horrifyingly real. The initial alarm spread like wildfire. When Margaret didn't answer her phone that Tuesday night, her closest friend, Eleanor, grew concerned. It wasn't like Margaret to miss their nightly chat. By Wednesday morning, when calls went unanswered and her car remained untouched in her driveway, Eleanor contacted Margaret's son, David. A frantic call to the Des Moines Police Department soon followed. Officers arrived at Margaret's home, finding everything meticulously in place. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, just an untouched breakfast table and a half-finished crossword puzzle on the living room coffee table. It was as if she had simply walked out the door and dissolved. Initial search efforts were immediate and widespread. Neighbors scoured their yards, volunteers combed the nearby park, and police interviewed every garden club member, every local shop owner she frequented. But each inquiry led to a dead end. The fear began to curdle into a cold, hard dread as hours turned into days, and still, no trace of Margaret. The baffling absence of any clues, any footprints, any witnesses to anything out of the ordinary, made her vanishing act all the more terrifying. It was a vacuum of information, a silence that screamed louder than any alarm. This profound mystery, decades in the making, has captivated the hearts of many true crime enthusiasts. If you're as intrigued by these stories of justice, secrets, and the relentless pursuit of truth, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these complex narratives to light, ensuring that even after all this time, the search for answers never truly ends. The initial police investigation into Margaret Collins's disappearance was characterized by a meticulous yet frustrating thoroughness. Detectives swarmed her quiet, tree-lined street, canvassing every house, speaking to every neighbor, and meticulously documenting the scene inside her home. The lack of forced entry remained a significant puzzle. Doors were locked from the inside, windows secured, indicating either Margaret had left willingly or had opened the door to someone she knew. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken vases, nothing to suggest violence had erupted within her sanctuary. Her purse, containing a modest amount of cash and her identification, was still on the hall table, dismissing theories of a robbery gone wrong. The Garden Club members were interviewed repeatedly, each trying to recall any unusual behavior, any strange car, any lingering glance, but their collective memories yielded only the mundane details of their last meeting with Margaret, filled with pleasant chatter about perennials and upcoming events. The limited leads made every new piece of information, however small, seem monumental, only for it to unravel into another dead end. The early stages were a painstaking process of elimination, gradually chipping away at possibilities without ever landing on a concrete direction. Margaret's vanishing accent ripples of fear and suspicion through the close-knit Des Moines community. What began as concern quickly morphed into a chilling apprehension. Neighbors eyed each other with newfound caution, doors that once stood ajar were now double-locked, and the evening streets, usually bustling with dog walkers and children playing, grew eerily quiet. The local news channels ran continuous stories, featuring Margaret's smiling portrait, broadcasting appeals from the police chief, and interviewing distraught friends. Public service announcements aired frequently, asking anyone, even those with the smallest snippet of information, to come forward. The collective imagination of Des Moines residents ran wild, conjuring scenarios ranging from a random abduction to a sinister plot concocted by someone within their very midst. This pervasive anxiety eroded the once firm sense of security, leaving a lingering unease that would persist for years, a constant reminder of the woman who simply disappeared without a trace. The vibrant community spirit, once a source of comfort, now felt vulnerable, exposed to an unknown threat. For Margaret's children, David and Susan, and her grandchildren, the passage of days without answers was an ordeal of unimaginable proportions. What began as a frantic search escalated into a desolate waiting game. Every phone call brought a fresh wave of hope, only to crash into the harsh reality of another dead end. Days bled into weeks, then months, each passing moment deepening the agonizing uncertainty. They hired private investigators, distributed countless missing person flyers, and made emotionally charged appeals to the public through tearful press conferences. David flew back and forth from his home in California, relentlessly pushing the police for updates, poring over every detail shared, desperate for a breakthrough. Susan, closer to home, organized prayer vigils and community meetings, refusing to let her mother's memory fade or her case be forgotten. Their life became consumed by the search for Margaret, a relentless pursuit of a ghost. The emotional toll was immense, fracturing their sense of normalcy, and leaving an open wound that refused to heal, a constant ache. Born from an unsolved mystery. Despite the initial fervent efforts of law enforcement, and the tireless campaigning by Margaret's family, the trail grew colder with each passing year. The initial tips dwindled, the public interest waned, and other cases began to demand the attention of the police department. Margaret Collins's file, once a thick binder overflowing with leads and witness statements, slowly receded into the cavernous archives of the Des Moines Police Department. It became another name on the ever-growing list of unsolved mysteries, a haunting entry in the city's criminal history. The case officially entered cold status, a designation that brought little comfort to her family, serving only as a grim acknowledgement that active investigations had ceased. For decades, it remained a phantom pain for her loved ones, a silent question mark hanging over the city, an unsolved mystery that defied logic and haunted the collective memory, a constant reminder of the day the respected widow, Margaret Collins, simply vanished. Decades blurred into an indistinguishable stream since Margaret Collins disappeared, each year layering dust upon her cold case file. The calendar pages turned from 1979 to the new millennium, then well beyond, bridging an enormous chasm of time. What was once the cutting edge of law enforcement in the late 70s, like rudimentary fingerprinting and witness interviews, began to feel like ancient history. But as the world hurtled forward, so did the sciences that underpinned criminal investigations. Forensic science matured exponentially, evolving from simple blood typing to sophisticated serology. Crucially, DNA technology emerged from the realms of scientific journals and academic labs into the everyday toolkit of crime scene investigators. Techniques like polymerase chain reaction, once unheard of, became standard, allowing minute samples to yield crucial genetic profiles. This revolution in forensic capabilities offered a glimmer of hope, suggesting that even the oldest, most intractable cases, like Margaret's, might one day be resurrected, their secrets unlocked by technologies that didn't even exist when the crime was committed. The promise of DNA, a silent witness preserved in trace evidence, provided a tangible reason for optimism, a scientific lifeline cast across the decades. It was against this backdrop of evolving science and renewed institutional memory that Margaret Collins's file was eventually pulled from its dusty resting place. A new generation of detectives, some of whom weren't even born when Margaret vanished, inherited the legacy of Des Moines' unsolved mysteries. Driven by advancements in forensic techniques and perhaps a fresh, unbiased perspective untouched by the initial frustrations, a small cold case unit decided to revisit Margaret's disappearance. It was a painstaking, often disheartening task. They meticulously sifted through yellowed reports, faded photographs, and handwritten notes, each document a ghost of the past. Witness statements, once meticulously recorded on typewriters, were digitized, allowing for cross-referencing and keyword searches that were impossible in 1979. They looked for inconsistencies that might have been overlooked, connections that might have been dismissed, and tiny details that, with the benefit of hindsight and new scientific tools, could now hold profound significance. The sheer volume of material required unwavering dedication, a commitment to honoring a woman whose life had been unjustly truncated and whose fate remained unknown. This painstaking review eventually yielded its first, tantalizing glimmer of hope. Among the mountain of archived evidence was a small, almost insignificant, piece of fabric. It had been found clutched in Margaret's hand, partially hidden from view, in a photograph taken during the initial search of her garden. The original investigators had dismissed it as a stray thread from her own clothing, a logical conclusion given the limitations of the time. However, the new cold case detective, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Miller, noticed something peculiar. The weave of the fabric, while similar in color to Margaret's garden smock, appeared subtly different under high magnification. It seemed coarser, perhaps synthetic, and definitely not of the same material Margaret was known to wear. This tiny, uncatalogued piece of evidence, preserved for over 40 years, was immediately flagged for advanced forensic analysis. It was a breakthrough not in what it was, but in what it could be, a foreign element, potentially a fragment from a perpetrator's clothing, waiting for a modern scientific voice. With this newfound focus, the old suspect list was re-examined, though largely for due diligence and to establish a complete historical record. The garden club members, the postal worker, the occasional handyman Margaret employed, all were briefly considered again, their past alibis and statements scrutinized through fresh eyes and against the backdrop of potential new evidence. There was Margaret's estranged nephew, who had a history of financial troubles, briefly a person of interest in the early days. He was tracked down, now a frail old man, and his whereabouts confirmed for the period in question, meticulously ruling him out once more. Another individual, a transient handyman who had done some work for Margaret a few weeks before her disappearance, also resurfaced, but his movements were eventually accounted for by old police records from another state. The process was slow, arduous, and often led to dead ends, reinforcing the challenges of an investigation spanning so many decades. Yet, each elimination, each person cleared, tightened the circle, pushing the focus further into the unknown, towards an unexpected possibility. This systematic process of elimination, while frustrating, had inadvertently cleared the path for a deeper, more granular examination of the remaining evidence. Detective Miller's persistence with the small fabric sample proved prescient. The advanced forensic analysis revealed that the thread was indeed synthetic, a type of polyester blend commonly used in work uniforms during the late 1970s. This detail, insignificant 4 decades prior, now provided a concrete, if still vague, lead. Further tests on the fabric also detected microscopic traces of paint and commercial-grade cleaning solvents, substances not typically found on a garden smock or within Margaret's pristine home environment. These minute findings began to chip away at the long-held assumption that Margaret's disappearance was either spontaneous or the act of someone known to her, perhaps a social acquaintance. The presence of these foreign chemical signatures suggested an interaction with someone involved in a particular type of labor, leading the investigative team down an entirely new avenue of inquiry, one that had been wholly overlooked in the initial frenzy of 1979. The initial theory of a random abduction or a crime of opportunity began to wane, replaced by a nascent, more disturbing narrative. The combination of the synthetic fiber, the paint, and the cleaning solvents started to paint a picture of an individual whose life revolved around manual work, someone who might have had access to such materials regularly. Could Margaret have encountered a repairman, a delivery person, or even a city worker? The detectives pored over old city records, looking for any maintenance work done on or near Margaret's property in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. They cross-referenced these with local businesses that might have employed individuals using such uniforms and materials. This detailed archival work was painstaking, requiring countless hours poring over faded invoices and employee logs from businesses that, in many cases, no longer existed. They were essentially reconstructing a hidden microeconomy from 4 decades ago, searching for a phantom. As they delved deeper into the forgotten corners of Des Moines' past, the investigation began to uncover subtle, previously unnoticed connections in Margaret's seemingly tranquil life. They discovered that Margaret, a fiercely independent woman, had recently had a minor dispute with a local landscaping company regarding a repair to her sprinkler system. The company, a small outfit now defunct, had sent a young, relatively new employee to perform the repair. Margaret, known for her meticulous nature, had reportedly found fault with the quality of the work and had withheld partial payment, a detail dismissed as a minor inconvenience in the original investigation. However, in light of the new forensic evidence, this seemingly trivial disagreement suddenly took on a sinister hue. The employee in question, a young man named Arthur Jenkins, had left the landscaping company shortly after the incident and had moved out of state, disappearing from public records. His rapid departure, combined with the dispute, felt less like coincidence and more like a significant thread. Detective Miller, a tenacious investigator with an uncanny ability to connect disparate dots, was particularly drawn to this emerging narrative. She meticulously cross-referenced Arthur Jenkins's brief employment record with the historical weather data for the week of Margaret's disappearance. It showed that he was indeed working in the Des Moines area during that time. Miller wasn't just following leads, she was building a psychological profile, trying to understand the kind of person who might react violently to a perceived slight. Her dedication to Margaret's case was unwavering, almost personal. She felt a profound sense of responsibility to the forgotten widow, seeing her not as a cold case file but as a vibrant individual whose life had been unjustly taken. Miller recognized that the key to unlocking this decades-old mystery lay not in seeking grand revelations, but in patiently piecing together the fragmented echoes of a forgotten time, until the whispers of the past finally coalesced into a clear, undeniable voice. She knew this was her chance to give Margaret Collins the justice she deserved. The clear voice that Detective Miller unearthed from the whispers of the past began to articulate a name: Arthur Jenkins. This revelation sent a jolt through the cold case unit. Jenkins was not a family member, not a close friend, not even a casual acquaintance of Margaret's inner circle. He was, to all appearances, a nobody, a fleeting presence in Margaret's life, a young landscaper who had performed a single, unremarkable repair. The shock and initial disbelief among the veteran detectives were palpable. How could such an insignificant interaction 40 years ago be the key to a decades-old enigma? Yet Miller's quiet conviction, backed by the new forensic profile derived from the tiny fabric sample, commanded attention. The paint, the solvents, the polyester blend, all pointed towards a background like Jenkins's. This wasn't the cunning mastermind they had perhaps unconsciously anticipated, but an ordinary man whose name had barely registered in the initial flurry of police activity. Arthur Jenkins, at the time of Margaret's disappearance, was barely 22 years old. His profile was chillingly mundane: a high school dropout, prone to petty grievances, with a string of low-paying, transient jobs. He was described by former coworkers as quiet, even sullen, but not overtly aggressive. Yet there were whispers of a quick temper, a tendency to feel disrespected, and a history of resentment towards perceived slights, especially from those he deemed privileged. He lived in a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of Des Moines, a ghost in the urban landscape. After leaving the landscaping company, he had moved to a different state, eventually settling into a routine existence, working various manual labor jobs, marrying, and raising a family. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary citizen, living an unremarkable life, utterly disconnected from the cold case that had consumed a community. The hidden darkness was his simmering rage, a quiet fury that, on one fateful day, had erupted with devastating consequences. As the team delved deeper, the motive began to take a chillingly prosaic shape, far removed from the grand, dramatic narratives often imagined for such a protracted mystery. It wasn't about inheritance, or a clandestine affair, or a deep-seated conspiracy. It was about a perceived disrespect, a trivial financial dispute that had ignited a spark in a young man already harboring a dangerous sense of grievance. Margaret's decision to withhold a portion of the payment for the faulty sprinkler repair, a perfectly reasonable action in her mind, had been interpreted by Jenkins as a profound personal affront, a wealthy woman belittling a working man. The emerging theory suggested an impulsive act, a sudden, explosive loss of control fueled by resentment, and a feeling of being undervalued. He hadn't planned a murder, he had reacted to a perceived injustice, and Margaret Collins, unfortunately, bore the brunt of his unmanaged anger. This mundane, yet terrifyingly plausible, motive underscored the fragility of life and the unforeseen consequences of everyday interactions. With Arthur Jenkins now firmly in their sights, the cold case unit shifted its strategy from historical review to active, covert investigation. They needed more than a 40-year-old thread and a speculative motive. They needed concrete, corroborating evidence to build a prosecutable case. Jenkins, now in his 60s, was living a quiet life hundreds of miles away. Detectives began surveillance, discreetly observing his daily routines, his habits, and his interactions. They obtained warrants to access old employment records, financial statements, and even long-dormant Social Security records, meticulously piecing together his life story since 1979. They focused on any past legal infractions, any patterns of behavior that might hint at a violent past or a propensity for impulsive acts. The goal was to build an undeniable tapestry of evidence, linking the unremarkable man from the past to the tragic disappearance of Margaret Collins, ensuring that when the time came for confrontation, there would be no room for doubt. Each piece of information, painstakingly gathered, served as another brick in the wall of their meticulously constructed case. The careful collection of circumstantial evidence culminated in a strategic decision. It was time to confront Arthur Jenkins. Detectives initiated a rigorous surveillance operation, meticulously documenting his every move over several weeks. They observed him leaving his modest suburban home each morning for a landscaping job, returning in the evenings, a life of quiet routine that belied the dark secret he had carried for decades. Every interaction was scrutinized, every pattern analyzed. The goal was not just to observe, but to understand his demeanor, his reactions, and to identify the optimal moment for an apprehension that would minimize risk and maximize the potential for a truthful response. They followed him to grocery stores, to his local coffee shop, watching him interact with his family, a seemingly ordinary man living an ordinary life. This period of intense observation was critical, allowing the team to build a comprehensive behavioral profile, noting any tics or habits that might prove useful during an interrogation. The planning was elaborate, recognizing that this was a single, high-stakes opportunity to finally break a 40-year-old case. Finally, the day came. Jenkins was pulled over on his way home from work, a seemingly routine traffic stop initiated by uniformed officers. The cold case detectives, waiting nearby, then approached his vehicle. Confronted with the stark reality of law enforcement, Jenkins's initial reaction was a mixture of feigned confusion and denial. He insisted he had no idea why he was being detained, attempting to deflect suspicion with a practiced innocence. However, as Detective Miller calmly laid out the meticulously gathered evidence, the anachronistic fabric, the paint traces, the historical connection to Margaret Collins's property, followed by the revelation of the long-forgotten financial dispute, cracks began to appear in his facade. His composed demeanor slowly unraveled, giving way to a visible tremor, his eyes darting frantically. The interrogation room, a sterile environment designed to disorient, became the stage for a psychological battle. Miller, drawing on the behavioral profiles they had created, pressed him gently but relentlessly, focusing on the pressure points that their surveillance had revealed. She spoke not of murder, but of Margaret's dignity, of the family's decades of suffering, and the weight of a secret carried for so long. Eventually, after hours of intense questioning and the mounting pressure of irrefutable evidence, Arthur Jenkins broke. The confession, delivered in a low, choked voice, was a chilling recounting of a moment of impulsive rage, a trivial argument spiraling into an unspeakable act of violence. Tears, not of remorse but of self-pity, streamed down his face as he admitted to striking Margaret, subduing her, and then, in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, disposing of her body. The emotional impact of Jenkins's confession went far beyond the cold case unit. It immediately shifted the focus towards the agonizing task of finding Margaret Collins's remains. For 40 years, her family had lived with the unbearable uncertainty of where she lay. Jenkins, now stripped of his carefully constructed lies, provided vague, almost reluctant directions. He described a remote, wooded area outside Des Moines, a place he had frequented for hunting in his youth, a landscape inevitably altered by decades of development and natural growth. A massive search operation was launched, involving dozens of law enforcement personnel, cadaver dogs, and ground-penetrating radar. The community held its breath, praying that this final piece of the puzzle could finally bring peace. After days of painstaking searching, digging through layers of earth and time, the remains of Margaret Collins were finally discovered, exactly where Jenkins had indicated. The discovery, though grim, brought a profound, collective sigh of relief. It was a tangible confirmation, a physical end to the ethereal mystery, and the first step towards giving Margaret the dignified resting place her family had longed for. News of Arthur Jenkins's arrest and subsequent confession sent shockwaves through Des Moines. The community, which had carried the unspoken burden of Margaret's disappearance for so long, reacted with a complex mix of emotions. There was an overwhelming sense of vindication for the cold case team and a profound relief that the truth had finally emerged. But there was also a deep sadness, a collective mourning for Margaret, and a chilling realization that the perpetrator had walked among them, undetected, for so many years. Many remembered Jenkins, not as a suspect, but as a quiet, unassuming man, a neighbor to some, a passing acquaintance to others. The revelation shattered their sense of security, forcing them to confront the unsettling reality that evil can wear the most ordinary of faces. Candlelight vigils were held across the city, not just for Margaret, but for the lost innocence of a community that had once felt so safe. The story consumed local media, reigniting conversations about neighborly trust, the passage of time, and the relentless pursuit of justice. For Margaret's family, the emotions were even more raw, a mixture of bitter relief, profound sorrow, and a glimmer of hope that, after all this time, true justice was finally within reach. The legal machinery, slow and often cumbersome, now ground into motion, beginning the arduous process of bringing Arthur Jenkins to justice. The indictment came swiftly, charging him with the murder of Margaret Collins, a crime that had haunted Des Moines for 40 years. Pre-trial motions stretched out, as defense attorneys, appointed to Jenkins, argued about the admissibility of decades-old evidence and the circumstances surrounding his confession. The prosecution, spearheaded by a team of dedicated district attorneys, meticulously prepared their case, knowing the inherent challenges of prosecuting a crime where witnesses had aged, memories had faded, and the physical evidence, though compelling, had been preserved in far less sophisticated ways than modern forensics allowed. Every document, every photograph, every piece of testimony was painstakingly reviewed, ensuring an airtight presentation. It was a test of the legal system's ability to span generations, to reach back across time and deliver justice to a victim whose voice had been silenced for far too long. The legal proceedings became a battleground of timelines, forensic interpretations, and human memory, all converging on the fateful day in 1979. The trial itself was a spectacle, drawing national attention as a testament to the persistence of both law enforcement and the victim's family. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented a powerful narrative, weaving together the forensic analysis of the synthetic fiber found in Margaret's hand, the paint and cleaning solvent residues, and the historical records linking Jenkins to the landscaping company and the dispute over the sprinkler repair. Detective Miller's testimony was particularly compelling, as she detailed the multi-decade cold case investigation, the meticulous process of re-examining evidence, and the strategic surveillance that ultimately led to Jenkins. Former colleagues of Jenkins, now elderly and frail, reluctantly testified to his short temper and his resentment towards clients he perceived as condescending. The most harrowing testimony came from the medical examiner, who, even after 40 years, was able to confirm the nature of Margaret's injuries. The defense attempted to discredit the confession, arguing it was coerced, and challenged the age of the evidence, suggesting contamination or misinterpretation over time. Yet, the sheer weight of the circumstantial and forensic evidence, combined with Jenkins's detailed confession to the police, painted an undeniable picture for the jury. Perhaps the most poignant moments of the trial came during the victim impact statements. Margaret Collins's children, David and Susan, now in their own twilight years, stood before the court, their voices trembling with decades of suppressed grief and anger. David spoke of the void his mother's disappearance had left in his life, the constant wondering, the missed milestones, and the agonizing uncertainty that had plagued every family gathering. Susan, her eyes filled with tears, described the profound impact on her own children, who had grown up knowing their grandmother only as a smiling face in a framed photograph, an unsolved mystery casting a long shadow over their childhoods. They spoke not of vengeance, but of the immense pain of not knowing, of the hope that had flickered and dimmed countless times over the years. They recounted the tireless efforts to keep their mother's memory alive, the despair that had threatened to consume them, and the profound relief, mingled with sorrow, that they could finally lay her to rest with dignity. Their words painted a vivid picture of the enduring human cost of a single act of violence, a ripple effect that had touched 3 generations, and their testimony underscored the importance of finally bringing this chapter to a close. After days of deliberation, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The jury, having heard all the evidence and testimony, returned with their verdict. The foreman, his voice clear and steady, pronounced Arthur Jenkins guilty of the murder of Margaret Collins. A collective gasp, followed by quiet sobs of relief, swept through the gallery. For Margaret's family, it was the culmination of 40 years of waiting, of hoping, of enduring. It wasn't triumph, but a solemn acknowledgement of accountability, a long-awaited finality. The mystery that had consumed their lives, and haunted the community, was finally solved, its perpetrator identified and held responsible. The verdict, delivered in a modern courtroom, echoed with the voices of the past, finally giving Margaret Collins the justice that had been denied to her for so long. The guilty verdict, a seismic shift in the decades-long silence, was swiftly followed by the sentencing phase. Arthur Jenkins, a man who had walked free for 40 years, was condemned to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke not only of the egregious nature of the crime but also of the profound and lasting impact it had on Margaret Collins's family and the community of Des Moines. He emphasized the cruelty of denying a family closure for so long, of forcing them to bear the agonizing weight of uncertainty. For Margaret's children, David and Susan, this final pronouncement of justice was not a moment of joyous celebration, but rather a somber, cathartic release. It was the formal end to a nightmare that had permeated every aspect of their lives since that autumn day in 1979. The legal process, though arduous and stretched across innumerable hours of agonizing testimony, had ultimately prevailed. It stood as a powerful testament to the unwavering dedication of the Cold Case Unit, the relentless pursuit of truth across generations, and the fundamental principle that no crime, no matter how old, should ever truly be forgotten. The significance of this cold case finally being solved resonated far beyond the confines of the courtroom, echoing as a beacon of hope for countless other families still searching for answers. It proved that time, while a formidable adversary, does not necessarily extinguish the flame of justice. This long-awaited resolution offered a potent reflection on the broader themes of justice, persistence, and the enduring and often devastating impact of crime on families and entire communities. Margaret Collins's case became a symbol, a powerful narrative illustrating how even the coldest cases can find their resolution, provided there is enough dedication, enough innovation, and enough refusal to surrender to the passage of time. It underscored the profound moral obligation society holds to its victims, to those whose lives were unjustly cut short, and to their loved ones left behind to grapple with unimaginable grief and unanswered questions. The persistence of Detective Miller and her team, their willingness to pore over dusty files, to re-examine what was once dismissed, to embrace new forensic technologies, demonstrated an unwavering commitment to a woman they had never met. Their work served as a poignant reminder that justice is not merely a legal concept, but a deeply human pursuit, fueled by empathy and a tireless quest for truth. The ability to bring closure, even decades later, had a ripple effect, restoring a measure of faith in the system and offering a glimmer of healing to a community scarred by uncertainty. Ultimately, this story is a final, unwavering tribute to Margaret Collins herself. She should not merely be remembered as a victim, a name etched into a cold case file, but as the vibrant, respected woman she was, a beloved widow, an active member of her garden club, a woman cherished by her family and friends. Her life mattered, her contributions enriched her community, and her sudden, tragic loss left an irreplaceable void. The resolution of her case ensures that her memory is honored, not just by the identification of her killer, but by the understanding that her life was valued, and her pursuit of justice was never abandoned. She can now rest in peace, knowing that the truth, though delayed, finally emerged from the shadows. Her legacy is one of quiet dignity, resilience, and a testament to the enduring power of hope, even in the face of decades of silence. If Margaret Collins's journey from a forgotten cold case to a historic resolution has moved you, please make sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice, perseverance, and the human spirit. Like this video if you believe that every victim deserves their story told, and comment below with your thoughts on this remarkable case. We'll be bringing you another captivating story of unsolved mysteries and legal breakthroughs next week.